the good news is that the election is not too far away. The bad news is you've got to listen to me beforehand. But I'll try to not be too long to search. Can I get you to time me to let me know if I can point my finger at other people?
I will be very careful.
Okay. So, it's been 4 full days. There's been a lot of technical talks. You guys are probably pretty saturated by now with information. But I'd like to ask you a question so you can't get off the feet and your job ask you any questions. How many of you would be happy to have a CCS project in your city, where you live? Does anybody I want to see a show of hands. You can't be yes or no. How many of you would like to see, would have no issue with having a CCS project in your city where you live?
I have not.
Well, you don't know, but I'm asking. So I'm going to take from the rest of you that you would not want a CCS project in your city. Is that true? Silence. You must have an opinion after this. After three days, you're all smart students. Do you have any issues? Do you see any problem? I mean, this is one of the things we've been talking about. We've seen a lot of technical issues and so on. Is it not loud? Okay. So maybe you can't hear me. I'm going to ask you one more time. Then you have to vote. You have to vote one way or the other. Would you let a CCS project into your city? Yeah? Good question. Why not? Well, you've just heard why not from the Koreans, for starters. But there are many places, and this is part of it, that we'll discuss. There are questions, and you've been hearing all the technical reasons about CCS, all the parts of it, the capture, different types, storage, aspects of that, transportation. The big part we haven't talked about, but been alluded to, is public. You're going to also hear about the lawyers tomorrow, and they're really desperate, but that's for tomorrow. But public is a big thing. It's one of the biggest things that is really in this whole business. And it's important for you as young scientists and engineers that public engagement is going to be part of your career in all likelihood. And these kind of projects, CCS is a great example because it's somewhat controversial. And so the public are involved in this, and it's controversial. Do people believe in climate change? Is it expensive? Is it worth it? We continue to burn coal. There's a whole bunch of things. So it's a very interesting problem, and it covers through engineering and geology. It spans a lot of things. So it's a very interesting thing to work on. But the public have a part of this, and part of the reason is because it's a global situation, global climate change. Public are interested. Is this really a mechanism that we can use to address climate change? It's the management of this. It's how do we address using fossil fuels? So do you have to change your lifestyle? How much is that going to impact you? And obviously this large-scale testing. So this is just something that we've just heard in Korea. Toby mentioned it in his presentation. There's this project in Europe has been put on hold because of several problems, and that's probably largely why Europe doesn't have more storage projects. There's a lot of public opposition, and in North America too. So NIMBY is not in my backyard. That's what that means. I hope that translates somewhat, but that's a phenomenon. It's not. I'm happy to have CCS, but I don't want it in my backyard. Do it over there in somebody else's backyard. So that's what we're doing. So you deal with the public, and who is the public? Good question. We have something else. Who are stakeholders in your project? Now, stakeholders. I don't know what stakeholders translates into Italian.
Stakeholders.
No, but it's a tricky thing to define even in English. What is stakeholders? Stakeholders are basically people who have a bit of a vested interest or an interest in the project, and for the most part, they are people such as the local decision makers, so the mayors of your city, environmental groups, those kind of people, and they represent sort of the community for the most part. And of course, the project developers who are pushing forward, they have an interest in it. Of course, they want to make money, or they just seem to need to make it go. And obviously, the regulators, who also represent the public at some level, but also have to balance their needs with the regulators, with the project developers. So these are kind of the stakeholders. And then there's the public that circulate all around that. And the public are interested in this. So your job, our job, is to communicate with those people and engage effectively with these projects that can be kind of sticky problems to deal with. We're going to talk about injecting millions of tons of gas underneath your backyard, potentially. You know, metaphorically your backyard, but maybe not. So basically, you have to have open communication. For the most part, in most of our societies, open communication, people understand, they're going to Google, they're going to come to a meeting, and they're going to know, you know what, I've heard that you can induce seismicity with ejected CO2. So you have to be open with that. You have to identify what the questions might be, what kind of mitigation processes you may have thought of, and all of this does not guarantee you any kind of public support. It really matters how you engage. I don't know if any of you have to ever explain what you do to your parents, what kind of research you're working on, or anything like that, or your friends. I know I had when I go home when I was in grad school, and my dad would say, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm looking at this topic, fractionation and these carbonates." It's really, and he'd roll his eyes, and you know, what are you wasting your time on that for? So these discussions, you have to really understand the audience you're talking to. If I explain to them really what the purpose of that was, it's easy, you know. So it's really how you engage. You have to be flexible in how you talk to people. You have to know your audience. If you're talking to a technical group like you, for example, we can use some chemical engineering terms. Maybe you know what sterically hinged amines are. I have no idea what those are, but those are things that are brought up. So if you have that kind of vocabulary, that's really what it is. We, as scientists and engineers, have our vocabulary. And in this meeting today, you've seen how different specialists will use their vocabulary. So when we're talking to communities, we lapse into that. We start to talk in our jargon. We don't even know it. And so scientists and engineers are often not the best communicators to public. And that's quite often why projects will have their own public kind of communicators. So there's a number of methods of communicating. One of these is an informal engagement. This is a form of informal engagement. I'm effectively engaging you in stakeholder engagement right now. This is what's happening. You are sort of stakeholders, you are a knowledgeable group, but you're not necessarily actively involved in CCS, or maybe some of you will be. But you have to be aware of it. Here's my colleague Sally Greenberg, who's talking to a bunch of students. You know? So obviously you have to be flexible, but if you're talking to a bunch of scientists, then you have to have a different mode of engagement. Formal engagements, these are more the permitting type of things, and this is a little more dreary, but it's stuff you have to do. And this is the United States situation where you have to do things formally. You have to put in public permit engagement, then there's a period of time when the public responds, and then you respond back, and it goes back and forth. So this is a different kind of engagement, but the public is involved, and they can write questions, and really this is where they can effectively stop a project at this kind of stage. So it's a shared responsibility, this whole thing. It's shared with the scientists, it's shared with the community, the project developers. And we really have to figure out a way to engage it. So this is really the trick. How do you engage people? How do you make them interested? And how do you make them really care about the project? And it's not that easy, but you do have to understand your audience. So it would probably be a good idea to have me and come and talk to the Italian community that you live in. Likewise, it probably wouldn't be good for you to come. On the other hand, there's always this sort of perception that wherever you are, getting an external expert somehow gives you more credence to your project, which is a bit silly, but that's the way the communities often are. So you have to kind of figure out what it is you need to do. But you really need to understand your community, and in projects, more and more and more, you have to have engagement as part of your project plan. So you have to have a communication plan, an engagement plan. It's built right into that. And it may be a lot of engagement for the public. You may want to minimize it, but it has to be part of a plan. And this is in here just to make sure that you are honest, basically. And I said something earlier, like Google's there. People are going to know. People are smart. They may not have the technical expertise that you may have in that specialty, but they're going to figure out if you're not telling the truth. So if you don't get the truth, this is what happens. You've lost your community, that project is in desperate straits, and it's probably gone. And so this is what's happened in the Netherlands, and it can happen just about anywhere, right? So you got to be honest. I put this in for Roman because I don't understand maybe Russian things, but basically what it is, you have to understand how deep down you have to get into your engagement. So be be factual, be truthful. You want to cultivate knowledgeable stakeholders. That's what this short course is about. We're cultivating you as knowledgeable stakeholders. So you have an opinion now. You understand the pluses and the minuses of all this. What are some of the risks? And when I asked you, would you put a CCS project in your city, then you can put up your hand, yes or no, more confidently, and can be a leader with other communities. And you really have to have this trust. And the one thing here, which is pretty interesting, I think, is addressing the perceived risks. And these are risks that we may know most. That's stupid to happen. It's unlikely to happen. You know, is injecting CO2 going to cause an alien invasion or something? Well, if people believe that, then it's a real risk. You know, if the Earth is flat, you're not going to sail out the end. And so people for years and years didn't want to sail too far because they're going to fall to the planet. So the perceived risks are real risks, and you have to do that in a project. So whatever those happen to be, if you're going to cause an earthquake or pollute the planet or something like that. So the next thing we have to deal with are conflicting messages, and this again is a very North American-centric approach, but I think it's similar across Europe and other places. Here we have, you can see, in reality, there's no such thing as clean coal on one side, and the other is clean coal. It's our future. Two completely opposite approaches. You can figure out which kind of organizations put those ads in these papers, and somewhere in the middle is maybe the truth. But these are the kind of messages that are out there for public. And another thing is that CCS is portrayed often as a symptom of the problem. And I think somehow along the line, we initially thought that coal-fired power plants were the things that we had to really most focus on, because they're the ones that are emitting most CO2, and somehow the CCS became very much a part of the coal industry. Well, in fact, CCS, carbon capture, it can be applied to any industry. It's essentially trying to make things reduce emissions of CO2 to the air. It could be if you're making solar cells in your factory, and you're emitting CO2 because of the hydrocarbons you use, and capturing that CO2, or manufacturing wind turbines, whatever it is, CO2. So really, CCS is an agnostic term in my opinion, and I think those of us who've been involved in it for a number of years can see that initially it has been linked very closely with coal, and it should be, because it can make a big difference. But it's seen as part of the problem, and seen when we have to get rid of CCS because it's part of the coal industry. So how many times have you seen this diagram this week? Quite a few, and you're going to see it again, I guarantee you. So this is also kind of propaganda, right? This is our message, this group's message to you. Oh, we have to do CCS. We have to do it. This is why, right? So I think we've given you some good reasons why CCS needs to be done, but this effectively is this. This is, I don't want to point your organization up, Toby, but this is the IA stuff. This is what we all use, and this is, you're innocent, don't worry about that. But again, this is a message. This is a messaging that we use in communities and other people say, look, we've got to do CCS. So again, public communication. So I just wanted to, I kind of wanted to do this quickly because I know you've just been inundated with a lot of facts and things today, but really, public engagement is an absolutely critical thing. There are some projects that really haven't needed to do it, and I'd be curious as to, certainly the Norwegian case in Sleipner, where they're offshore, they don't really have a community out in the middle of the ocean to deal with, but they still have the Norwegian people so that Norway's a great example or a bad example because they're extremely proactive. You can see in storage. In Australia, there's one of the largest plants that's going to happen is at an island, Barrow Island. Nobody lives on this island. It happens to be a Class A nature reserve, which means it's very highly protected, but there's nobody living there. But the Australian people are very interested in making sure. So there's always some stakeholder, even if you're doing this out in the middle of nowhere. And more, certainly where I'm from, these are being done in communities. So we engage in communities, and it's easier in a place where people are familiar with oil and gas, and you see drilling rigs and all that. But if you go somewhere, if you were to do this outside of New York City, you can only imagine the hullabaloo or the feedback, the negative feedback that you get. So these are some of the questions you get if you go talking to people, and you've heard a lot of this now. How do you know where the CO2 is? How do we know that? We do seismic. Well, how do we know that that's working? and all sorts of questions. So these are questions, legitimate questions. Will it cause earthquakes? You heard a great example. What a great segue into my talk. So that's, but that's the question that's probably the biggest question now. And then maybe is it going to contaminate drinking water? So those are usually the big things. And then, there's other things such as the liability and all that. But basically, bottom line is how do you know it's safe? And that's really what people want to know. So being able to address that confidently, being open, giving honest answers, that's the key. So don't look at it as this is a barrier, it's an opportunity. And really but in terms of your careers, no matter what you're doing, this is becoming much more and more important for people to be able to communicate. People have an increasingly higher level of distrust, I think, in some large science projects, partly to do with the resource industries. And I think with just simply more available facts that people are able to have a stronger voice about this kind of thing. And we're seeing, in North America and Europe that people are just not supportive of a lot of things anymore. So there are documents out there. These are just, I show you the International Finance Group, the World Resource Institute, and the USD, which have done a lot of work. My friends at NHL put out works on public outreach specific to this. So good luck with everything. Good luck with the workshop. This is a big part. It's not technical, but it's something that you should really keep in mind as a big part of your career. Being able to communicate is absolutely going to be your key to being an effective scientist or engineer. So thanks very much. I think we break for lunch, and then there's a very quick talk after that. There's time for questions. Yeah.
If you go back to the question, okay, these are usual. And so I was wondering if according to your previous experience, for each one of the questions, you may have to, it's possible to find somewhere what has not to be said, what has to be said, or which may be a successful answer, and what is better to forget because you're only creating
that is a great point. So if you couldn't hear the question, he says, basically, are there answers out there to these questions that projects can use and call on, and advice to avoid saying something stupid? And there are. I think there are a number of places in those documents that I just mentioned that do provide answers for some of these. But the point is also that each storage site, and mainly the questions around the storage, the geology part, is different. And so you do have to tailor that to the community. But there certainly are answers that you can't, you don't want to say anything, well, we don't think it's going to happen. That's not a good rate. We understand this problem, and we've done these kind of studies to determine that this is an extremely low likelihood. And say, no, it can't happen, it never happened, then you're not being honest. But if you are obviously, the likelihood of that is absolutely minuscule, and these are the reasons why, then you go a long way to gaining that support. And different places have, I don't want to pick any country out in particular, but say in China, I don't think this kind of public engagement would necessarily happen this month. They'd probably the government say, we're just going to do it here. But in more open areas, then that level of trust is there. Some places just don't trust the government as much as others. For example, the United States, people aren't as trustworthy in some areas of their government as other places.
Simple question, but very quickly, I don't see here as a question that generally arises in Europe, which is our benefit. Generally, the local population asks, you're coming, you will get money. What about us?
Yeah, I guess in terms of the benefit, that is something they would ask about. I mean, these are usually questions about the risk and the security, but the benefits are again very site specific, I think. So you're either giving jobs or you're contributing to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and contributing in that regard. But usually it's around economy. Are there going to be jobs, and how much of a difference it will make? And one thing in the United States has happened. There's a new law that's out, so it's promoting tax credits. And so also there's a lot more interest in this in the last few months. And that's also for storage, not associated with enhanced oil recovery, but just simply straight storage in these saline aquifers. And so communities now may see this as an opportunity for, you know what, we can have the site and operate it and get tax credits, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of tax credits. So every site, I think, will have a different answer to that. And to all these questions, really. But knowing these questions and having answers is really important. So that's why you have to do your homework. You have to have a plan. You have to think about this. You just don't show up to a public forum and wing it.
And also probably to know in advance something about the community. I mean, to start the dialogue to try to understand which would be the general sense.
Yeah, know your audience, which is know your community. Yeah, that's what that means. Totally.
I mean, it seems like CCS projects are taking a lot of effort to this now. How does it compare to other subsurface activity? I mean, is it CCS having to do more work, or is it just catching up with the normal?
Yeah, I don't know if everybody heard that, but it's the question of whether CCS is having to catch up in terms of public communication with other subsurface resource development or not. I think actually CCS has been to a large degree on the forefront because the obligations, and again, I'm probably being a bit North American in my answer, but the obligations to getting a carbon storage project going, you had to do all this characterization in the subsurface, and you had to demonstrate all the security of the campground, reservoir, that you never had to do in an oil and gas operation. They do large-scale fracking, hydrofracking operations. That they do not have to do this kind of level of characterization. They do some public engagement, but it's more of a forced effort, whereas I think CCS has been a little more practiced. So I think to a large degree, the CCS community has been ahead of the game, but we probably haven't done it as much because we have far fewer projects than in some of the other resource development.
Do you think it's gone too far? My impression is that there were a couple of instances in Europe, especially, where they really screwed up the public engagement, and there were big opposition. But maybe a lot of other projects seem to not have such a problem. I think.
Yeah. Well, there's been CCS projects that have gone forward with public engagement, some that haven't. And I think it still comes down to this: know your audience. And really get things done, and also have a plan. So maybe you want to engage, maybe you want to engage in a much more subtle way, but you have to have a plan. So I just think you really need to know. So in Bear and Direct, I'm not really sure how things went off the rail there. I know there's lots of stories about that. So Bear and Direct took place in the Netherlands where the project was canceled. Even though the city is above a natural gas storage site where they inject methane, which is an explosive gas, stored, and natural gas is stored in these kinds of situations as well. And they take it out, and they take it out for winter use and so on. Right, so the same thing, the city is right above a natural gas storage site, which was, that's okay. But carbon dioxide was absolutely not, because it's a new kid in town. So it's been much more closely scrutinized by a much more modern society. How about okay, a couple more comments.
Yes, sir. My question is about your experience in this binomial of CCS, geological restoration, and fracking. For example, in Antony, we have, let's say, the problem that Antony sites surrounding of fracking restoration permits. And in Spain, the fracking is seen like a witch, you know? You mentioned fracking and you mentioned the witch. And after close to 9 years, we have to explain almost every day, almost every month, that we are not doing fracking, because regarding the question, CO2 injections we produce, we're not fracking, the answer is yes. And we have to demonstrate we are a research project, and we are trying to demonstrate that we are fighting against climate change. What's your experience in your country, in Illinois? Since the fracking is not the same in USA like the West, I guess, because fracking is an operation.
It is. You don't want to use the F word. If in your discussions about CCS, but people confuse it completely. And for most people, the subsurface is one big mystery. And CCS, ESG, fracking, it's all one big thing. It's the same thing. And so that's a continual activity you just have to work on it. Fortunately, in Illinois, there is no fracking. It's not a big fracking area at the moment. So that has not entered into it, but people still think that. And the truth of the matter is, if you inject too fast, you could, intentionally fracture the rock, but it's not the same as what everybody thinks is hydrofracking. Roman.
We're facing one of the interesting challenges in the Venus project, or beginning to face it, which is basically says how do you have a balance between showing the data that you have, let's say you monitoring, seismic, whatever. How do you have this balance between showing the data, meaning not having anything, and presenting this in such a way that it would be easily understood? One of the questions we discussed recently is, for example, if you have a seismic data, you always have a lot of these microseismic points around, right? This is legal, and then this is, we as scientists know this is nothing. How do you basically, where is this balance? How do you avoid a situation that you're actually presenting some data in a single form, and then the people find that there's more, and they just go like,
That's a great, I don't have the answer clearly, but that's a great question. One of the things that happens when you do inject into the subsurface, you are going to change the stress field, the pressure field there, and you create these microseismic activities. Most sites do it. Maybe Slightner doesn't have it because it's such great porosity, but many things do. So you get a microseismic event, you have sensors down, and if I drop the book on the table, well, that's about a -3. That's what that would be. So if somebody asks you, did you create an earthquake? Well, we did a microseismic earthquake. It's not going to happen. It's 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers deep. That's not an issue. Technically, yes. And we know it's not a big deal. It's not an issue. But people are going to say, oh, what do you mean? It's an earthquake. Of course it's a big deal. So it's a real balance. And it's a a tough one. And this is sometimes where I wonder if the scientists, we're not equipped to tell it. We have to inform people this is happening. But maybe our way of communicating is, I don't know if we have the right way to do it. Sometimes I think hearing lay people who understand it, explain it, they are, more believable than scientists. There's a skill set there.
I would like to know if you know a way or somehow introduce this social impact into a bigger optimization problem. Like, for example, if I am evaluating the sustainability of the process of carbon capture, I got 3 pillars. The economic one can be done with the cost and everything. The environmental can be done with the indexes of the environmental, material balances, and so on. But the social impact, you know a way to include it into this multi-objective problem.
So how you would measure it? Like how you measure the effectiveness of your project? I don't know, but I think there's a whole network of people who communicate in this, and so there is a body of professionals who work in this area, and they know how to monitor the effectiveness of the program. But things in this sphere could just go like sideways. What I mean by sideways, but things can go bad in a hurry just because of poor communication, having a geologist like me saying something stupid. So I don't know really how you measure it, but I think there are people who could give you an answer to that question. So there is an answer to your question. I can't give it to you, maybe somebody else here. Maybe Rowan has probably done a lot of work in this area.
May I answer a comment?
Okay.
Probably
in the list of questions, most of them were technical, but one is probably not easy, it's about reliability. In one sense, by sequestrating in Illinois, you solve a problem for the whole world, so the whole world should be reliable. In another sense, someone maybe will get some carbon credits, so maybe that body should be liable. So in 2 words, maybe you can
Well, the liability here is really a legal liability. So who's responsible at that site? We inject that site, 10 years from now, the people who did it are gone and moved away. Who's responsible? And that is usually the state, whatever, state organization runs it, whether it's the country or the state or the province or something. So that's what that really means, to me anyway, who's liable. That needs to be defined. Maybe Ingrid will probably discuss that tomorrow. You can be sure there'll be lawyers involved.
Sorry, Stephen, if I understood, well, you're saying that the state is the responsible?
A state can be the responsible party. That's not defined everywhere by any means, but in the United States right now, the state of Illinois will assume the responsible, for example. In the long term, if that transitions, the idea is at some point the liability, once the organization has satisfied a bunch of requirements for long-term monitoring, whatever that long-term means, whether it's 10 years or, some places have a crazy length of time, that will transition into a state or run body. So it'll be Norway or it'll be the state of Holland or something like that.
Yes, but there are also...
One more question, then we've got to go from the state. One more comment.
Just in terms of liability, one of the enablers for this new CCS project in Norway was essentially that the government takes a little bit of the value chain. Because otherwise you start with this question of liability specifically on the transfer point. Right? I am delivering my CO2 to the pipeline. And then there's the transport, so you have to have someone who takes over the whole thing. And the government in this case, if it happens that the government is ready to take this, then this is a great benefit to the project.
That's a great point, because funders and people who want to invest in this know that the liability has to at some point be done, and without the state come up and say, we will do it after you've reached this, none of these projects will go forward. It's all, ultimately these projects, all the technical stuff, it comes around to financing and legal issues, really. And those are the kind of the real big stumbling blocks, or not stumbling blocks, parts to move this forward.